just to clarify, this panel is not about low-cost cosplay, as in making things as cheap as humanly possible. It's about picking a budget and actually sticking to the budget, which I figure every cosplayer in the crowd knows is actually kind of a pain. So this panel is for people who are interested in cosplay, who are new to cosplay, or maybe veterans to cosplay, who are just trying to look at a way to keep their hobby at a fairly decent cost range, so it's not all consuming their life. I've been cosplaying since 2007, and I've cosplayed as a high schooler, as someone in uni, and as a functioning adult. So I feel like I'm pretty good, got a lot of experience here to talk about how you can actually save money. Maybe you'll disagree with me. At the end, we'll have a question and answer session, so if you guys have any complaints, you can raise them there. If you have any questions during the panel, I'd ask you to hold them until the end, because my train of thought just goes, and then I'll forget where I am. I'm sure everyone knows that feeling. So we'll start with some tips and tricks and then go through some more practical things that you can do, and then I will show some examples of costumes I've done and how I've kept prices down. Fair warning, it's a lot of pictures of my cosplays because I didn't want to use pictures of other people's cosplays, so it's a bit cringy. I apologize in advance. So let's start. So my first thing I have to say to everyone in here who wants to make a cosplay is, if you're trying to work within a budget and your budget maybe isn't as high as other people's, you need to start in advance, and this is critical. So if you are at Comic-Con this weekend and you see a cosplay that you're like, I want to do that for next May, start it next week. Don't start it in April, don't start it a week before the convention, start it now. And that is going to be the main way that you actually save money on your costumes, because research is absolutely key here, and if you don't have the time to research, it's not going to go very well. So in regards to actually planning something, taking the time, taking a few months to work out what you're doing before you actually start, there are some easy tips and tricks. There's lots of apps that exist that you can use to help kind of get your mind into the gear of what you're doing. I personally don't use it, but Cosplanner is an app you can get on the phone, which allows you to actually break down your costume into separate pieces. So you can go, okay, wig, and it lets you put prices in. And then when you bought those components, you can actually tick, yes, I bought those components. Not from my personal experience, but I know for a fact some friends have been working on cosplays, bought the wig, and then completely forgotten where they put the wig. So they've gone, I don't know if I bought it or not. Did I buy this wig? I don't remember. And then they buy a second wig, which is wasting way more money as part of their budget, and now they've got 2 wigs for absolutely no reason. Which is fine if it's like a normal black wig that you can use for every main character in an anime ever, but if it's a specialist wig, you've got a bit of a problem. So apps like this can help you keep track of it. I personally like Cosplay Amino because it lets you do a blog function, so whenever I make part of a costume, I'll post a blog post about like how I made it, which reminds me, A, what I've done, and B, that I've actually made it and I don't have to do it for the costume. Also, old-fashioned lists, writing it down on a piece of paper, fantastic way to actually work out what you need, and then you can start working out where you need to get it from. And this is great because research and experimentation is how you're going to actually stay within budget. And the reason why that's useful is because you can start looking at how to get materials for your costume at cheaper costs. So if you have your list, you know exactly what you need for that costume. You can start going, okay, when am I going to get this? Wigs is a fantastic example because wigs tend to be quite an expensive part of a costume. I personally really like Coscraft and Arda and places like that for wigs, which are expensive. And I don't want to buy them full price, because why would I do that? So if I'm planning a cosplay for May now, I know that Black Friday is in November, so why would I not buy my wig then? But if I'm thinking about my cosplay in May, for May MCM, I don't get to use a sales, I have to buy the wig full price. And it might only be 10% off, it might be 20% off, but at the end of the day, that's going to contribute towards actually staying within your price range and making sure you're not overspending. Mailing lists are also really good. If you're researching things that you want and you find a website that has it, you join their mailing list, people will often do flash sales. So if you don't need it that week because the cosplay needs to be done in 5 months, you can wait, and maybe in a month or 2 you'll get a flash sale, you can buy it then, you're keeping that cost down. The other thing is that if you're starting in advance, it tends to be, and it's not always the case, but I would say 75% of the time, longer shipping time equals cheaper items. So I've used an example here. I was like, I'm gonna look up gold ribbon or gold trim on eBay, which I tend to use in basically every single costume I make because it hides those seams. And so I thought, okay, I need 5 meters of trim for an imaginary cloak I'm making. So I can get the top one, which comes to about £1 for 5 meters of trim, but I've got to wait till the end of November to get it. Well, if my costume's not for May, what do I care if I've got to wait a month to get it? But if my costume was for next week, well, I have to buy this one, which is £4. You're probably thinking, well, £3's not actually that much, but it's those little things that add up. If everything you're buying is £3 more expensive, suddenly you're going 20 quid over your budget or things like that, just because you need the object now rather than waiting and being able to use it later. My other favorite trick for keeping costs down is, I feel like most of us in here probably have a relative who always asks you what you want for your birthday, and you go, I don't know what I want. For me, it's my sister. She goes, what do you want? And I go, oh, I don't know. So I get her to buy me a wig every year, which means I don't have to buy that wig. But that means I have to be planning my cosplays for next year in December. I have to go, okay, what am I making next year? All right, next year I'm going to make a Kingdom Hearts cosplay. So when my family member asks me what I want for Christmas, I'll ask for that wig. And then you don't even have to factor that into your costs at all. So everyone probably has at least one family member like that. So it's definitely worth thinking about that. What can you get other people to get for you? I find it works. Maybe that doesn't work for you. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is why starting really far in advance is literally the best thing you can do, is that it tends to be that your lower material cost is a longer construction time. My main example for this is building armor. Do we have people who build armor in here? Okay, yeah, couple. Yeah, you're waving at me, you're like, yes, I'm wearing one right now. So one of the things about armor building is you normally have to prime it, then you've got to paint it, and then you've got to seal it. And at the end of the day, you can buy really awesome spray paints for priming, painting, and sealing. And if you get a good spray paint, that sets within an hour, and you can start working on that costume piece in an hour. But spray paint can be kind of pricey, so maybe you're thinking, I'm going to use a regular paint, like an acrylic. But the acrylic is going to take longer to dry. It's going to take a day, you're not going to be able to work on that piece, and it's actually going to take longer to apply. So while it doesn't seem like a really big deal whether you're spending 5 minutes spray painting something or an hour actually brush painting something, those little things add up, but they save money. So if you're starting a costume 2 weeks before, you're probably going to need the spray paint because you're literally not going to have the time to sit there and hand paint everything. If you've got 2 months, you can sit there on a Sunday lazy morning on the floor and just hand paint to your heart's content. I find it very therapeutic. I don't know about you, but love me a bit of finger painting on my armor builds, mostly because brushes are a terrible time. So the other thing when it comes to kind of working out your budget is kind of working out where to actually buy your supplies. Once you've decided what you're getting, you've decided what your time frame is, it's where you're going to look for those things. And I must admit, before this year, I was basically like, I'm going to go online because eBay is the cheapest thing in the world. Why would I go anywhere else? But basically, like, every town in England has like a market, and markets tend to do wholesale fabrics, which tend to actually be cheaper than you can get online. And the thing with market fabrics is they're not always going to have what you want, right? So it's that thing of, again, how much time do you have? If you go to the market and they don't have the fabric you want, do you have the time to go, I'll come back in a month, or I'll ask them to order it in for me? Whereas if you don't have that time, you've got to go online, you've got to go, okay, I'm going to buy twice the price of fabric, but it's going to arrive tomorrow. And this does factor into research a bit. You've got to shop around, you've got to look for what you actually want. So I find the markets to be really good, and local craft shops like haberdasheries and things like that. But the key thing for staying within budget is to always be on the lookout for cosplay pieces. My favorite story of this is I visited some friends in Rome a couple years ago, and they're all cosplayers, and one of my friends went, you know, I found a really great thermoplastic that they sell on Via del Corso, and I went, let's go buy it. I was like, it's cheaper than Warbler, it's cheaper than anything else, we're gonna go buy it right now. He was like, you're on holiday. I was like, I don't care. I need that for a costume I'm building next year. And so I walked around Rome for the rest of the day with a giant roll of 4X under my arm, which was fantastic going around the ruins. But I got my cheap thermoplastic, and I was very happy. So it's one of those things that, like, if you're always looking, if you've got your list on your phone, you know what pieces of your costume you want, you know how much it's gonna cost if you get it online. It means if you're in a shop somewhere and you see exactly what you need and you can go, oh, is this cheaper than I have it online? Yes, it is. Go get that. You're already prepared. You're ready to go. So yeah, that's what I would say for where to buy things. And you guys might have places that you know are going to have what you want for a price you want. It's all about looking for things. The other thing I would say about keeping budgets down is you do need to research materials. So I'll talk a bit about foam and fabric and explain why that's actually good for keeping costs down. So the first one is foam. For any people who are foamsmiths in here, I know this is a very, very generic explanation. No one burn me at the stake, I'm aware. If I had half an hour to talk about foam, this would be different. But there's different types of foam. Normally for cosplay, you're gonna see craft foam, EVA, which is ethyl vinyl acetate, and plastozote. And these are varying prices. You can go to Hobbycraft and you can get a sheet of craft foam for like £1. You can go to Polyprops and you can get a roll of EVA for £5. Plastozote tends to be more expensive. But the thing is, just because it's more expensive, it doesn't make it better for what you're doing. So you need to factor that into your budget. At the end of the day, all the foams are going to be good for different things. So I really like working with EVA, but I'm wearing a costume right now that I made these gauntlets, and they're 2 layers of foam. And I was like, well, I don't want 5mm EVA, 2 layers of foam being on my arm. I'm just going to be sweaty all day. So I'm using craft foam for this. It's cheaper, woohoo, but it's actually better for what I'm trying to do. Whereas when I'm making armor, I'm thinking, okay, I need EVA, so I'm going to budget that in. I don't want the craft foam for the armor because it's not actually going to hold properly. But then getting plastozote seems a bit excessive. I don't need to spend the extra money on the plastozote because that's not actually what I'm trying to achieve. Whereas if I was making a weapon, maybe I'd actually be looking at plastozote rather than EVA or craft foam. So it's one of those things where we kind of look at very fancy fabric and foam that's very expensive and go, well, this must be what I need, so surely I have to budget for that. But a bit of research will show you that actually you don't need to factor that in. You need to factor in the right material. And I would say the same is definitely true for fabric and trims. It is about research. For instance, I feel like I don't know a lot about fabrics and I'm learning a lot, and I went to this amazing panel at HibanaCon 2 years ago where this cosplayer talked about different fabrics and what you should use them for. And she talked about Duchess Satin, which I'd never heard of before. And Duchess Satin is fantastic. You're making a princess dress, that's probably a material you're going to be looking at because it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's got fantastic sheen to it. But if you're trying to look at the lining of a cloak that needs to be a bit shiny, Duchess Satin is probably a bit over the top for the inside of a cloak. So the cheaper alternative is the polyester satin, or prom dress fabric as it's called, which you can get for about £1 a meter, versus Duchess Satin, which is going to be about a tenner a meter. But again, it's what do you actually need to use. Just because something is pricier doesn't make it better. And that research, knowing exactly what fabric you need, one, is going to help you make your budget, and it's also going to help you stay within your budget. Because that can be one of the things. You're walking around Comic-Con, you see people with these amazing outfits who are spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds on them. That doesn't mean you have to, and that doesn't mean you have to use the fabric that they're using because you like the look of their costume. There's other ways to get around it. Satin and Velvet are kind of the really 2 big ones here. I really like crushed velvet as a material, one, because it's cheap and I just really like the feel of it. Like, I'm wearing velvet now and I'm just sitting here like, oh, I'm so soft. But there's different types of velvet if you're trying to do different things. But again, you don't have to go for the most expensive one because that's what you think you need. There's also a thing of with fabrics, you get a difference between natural fabrics and man-made fabrics. Where man-made fabrics, things like polyester, chiffon, things like that, they'll be cheaper. And it doesn't mean they're not as good as wool or linen and things like that, but it just means they're different. And if you're not really going to enter a competition, does it matter if your cloak is a really heavy polyester or if it's actually wool? That's up to you. But there's ways to make sure that you are staying within your price range and still getting nice fabric without necessarily going for the very, very top of what you're looking at. And I think that's very key to remember. The last thing in regards to supplies is bulk buying supplies. If you've never made a costume before and you plan on making more than one in your life, There is no reason to buy a pack of 5 glue sticks for £3 when a pack of 100 is £10.99. Literally no reason. You will use 100 glue sticks in your life, and they don't have an expiry date unless you put them near a heat source. Literally no problem. So when you're looking at, okay, I'm doing a costume, I need PVA glue. I can go and buy a 500 ml of PVA glue for £1, or I can buy a litre of it for £1.50. You're going to use it. Just buy the bigger amount, because then when you make your next costume, the material's already there. You don't have to factor that into your budget. You already have it. And that's something that's very important to do. I know I bulk buy glue sticks in the 100 pack literally all the time, and it's fantastic. You never run out of glue sticks. And this is true for adhesives, thread, trims, things like that. If there's a larger amount to get, and you think in the future you will ever make another costume, you might as well just get it. It will save you in the long run. And I will have an example of that. Paint's another good one for this. There's no point buying the small pack of paint if you're going to need it again. I know I go through like 8 tubes of gold paint a year, and I'm still only buying them in tubes rather than just buying a gallon of gold paint, which would probably be cheaper at this point. It's those things to think about. I don't know why this slide has gone twice, but here we are. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about ways that aren't necessarily fabrication, but are also really good at staying within your budget. And this is where all my cringy pictures come in. I apologize in advance. So things that you can recycle and reuse around the house, in other costumes, things like that, to keep your cosplay costs down. And my wig is annoying me. So the first one is materials that aren't necessarily things you'd think about. So you come to Comic-Con, everyone's got really nice thermoplastic props, everyone's got really nice foam props. Maybe your budget doesn't allow for that. Maybe you are someone in university working a part-time job, you're like, I don't have that money to spend on thermoplastics. You don't need it to make a good prop. I love using wood and plywood, and my favorite thing is that the B&Q near me literally throws out all the plywood that they can't sell and just lets people come and collect it. So every month I'm like, all right, time to go get my plywood, because that's, as long as you have the tools to work with it, that's fantastic for making swords. You don't need the fancy materials. You can just go and get free plywood from B&Q, or just regular wood. I think my favorite prop was, I cosplayed Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians. I was talking to my mum, I was like, how am I going to make this stuff? I'm going to need some PVC, I'm going to plaster it, I'm going to make the crook. And she went, okay, yeah, well, think about it. She went to walk the dog, she comes back into the house with an 8-foot branch that she'd taken from our neighbor's garden. And I was like, yeah, that works. Fine. So suddenly all those costs that I'd been planning for making my prop went out the window because we used a literal tree branch. So sometimes you need to think outside the box. And another thing that's great is cardboard. I figure mostly everyone has cardboard in their house, whether you've moved into a new place, you order something from Amazon. I keep all my cardboard and I stack it behind my sofa. So this is an axe I made for a costume in May, and I thought, oh my god, I've got nothing to make the center of this axe, what am I going to do? Went behind my sofa, got out a piece of cardboard, and that axe is entirely made out of cardboard. I think it looks pretty decent. Maybe you're like, no, that's the worst prop I've ever seen, but I like it. So you don't necessarily have to always go for the expensive materials, but when you're budgeting, it's fantastic to budget the pricey material and then make exactly what you were going to make out of with something completely different, and then be like, look at that 20 pounds I didn't spend. Oh yes, and then you feel like a real adult, and that's a good feeling. So definitely something to consider. Get creative. If you have a budget, you have to be creative or it's never going to work. The other thing is thrifting. So we kind of get this idea that like you have to make everything from scratch, which if you're doing a competition, okay, your costume has to be 80% basically, but if you're not doing a competition, who cares? And thrifting is a fantastic way to get the costume pieces you want while spending as little money as possible and fitting in your budget. So places like charity shops, vintage markets, those are like a really big deal right now. Free cycle events at universities and stuff, those are fantastic places for finding your costume pieces. Obviously, again, this is based on how early you start. If you need something for next week, you're probably going to have to Amazon Prime that. If you need something for 3 months from now, you can spend a couple of afternoons walking down the high street and looking at all the charity shops, and you'll probably find what you want. We did this book cosplay a couple years ago, and I realized I didn't own a single pair of jeans. I was like, who doesn't know jeans? Me, apparently. And I was like, what am I gonna do? So I ran to the charity shop and got a pair of jeans for 50p, and I was like, this is the cheapest cosplay I've ever made. Nice. So definitely be on the lookout for things. Don't necessarily assume you have to make everything, and you can budget for making that thing, and if you find the thing you need made and it's cheaper than what you budgeted, then absolutely go for it. You're saving on your budget, and you can then use that money elsewhere in your costume. The other thing is recycling old cosplays. So the costume I'm wearing now, I made back in 2017, and I thought it would be an amazing idea to make my shoes. Terrible decision. And so this year I thought, all right, I'm gonna get a new pair of shoes for this costume, which I'm currently wearing. They're extremely comfortable. But I realized I didn't want to actually have to remake everything from scratch. So I thought, well, I'll take apart the old shoes, I'll take off everything usable, and I'll put them on the new shoes. Just because a costume is broken doesn't mean you can't salvage things from it, and that's key. I definitely think cosplayers in general can be very wasteful, and we need to kind of go, okay, just because I'm not wearing this anymore, it doesn't mean it has to go in the bin. What's salvageable? You know, take the zips off, take the Velcro off. I recently had to throw out a suit of armor I made last year because it was garbage. And I sat there and I took out every pin, every tack, every piece of Velcro, every piece of elastic. And then while I was making my costumes for this con, I didn't have to buy any of it because I already had it from the previous costume. So definitely don't throw things away just because you're done with them. And this is also a thing about where you're buying cosplays from. Facebook is really good for getting secondhand cosplays or secondhand cosplay pieces. So if you're making, I don't know, a school uniform and you're like, I need this weird pleated skirt, the chances are someone's probably selling that pleated skirt on the cosplay sales groups. So you want to check those as well. But again, it's about making sure that you are starting early enough that you can actually look at the secondhand groups rather than having to go online and buy a new one. And also it's better for the environment to just recycle clothing and things like that. I just realized now that I was having issues with this PowerPoint last night and it's cut out one of my slides. So one of the other things I want to talk about, and going off the secondhand cosplay and thrifting stuff, is the fact that you probably have a lot of stuff in your house that also works for cosplays. So one of my friends who was actually just here before the panel started made a Pokemon Gajinka outfit out of old bed sheets. It was awesome. Old bed sheets lying around a house, literally didn't have to buy any fabric. And your parents probably have those, you probably have those that you're just never going to use again. You might as well put them to use. The other thing is clothing. I did a Danganronpa cosplay and I needed a school uniform. And I was like, well, I haven't grown since I was 12 years old. I have my middle school uniform that's exactly the same colors. I cut it up, I had all the fabric from that uniform left to make this Danganronpa costume. So I made the entire costume basically for free out of clothing that I was never going to wear again, because why would I wear a school uniform that I don't go to that school anymore? So that's really good. And it's not even just old clothing, it's things that you have in your wardrobe. So for anyone in here who does martial arts, I use my gi all the time for cosplay. Like, it's literally, my Kenjutsu kit is just what they wear in Bleach. I'm like, yeah, I got a Bleach cosplay just hanging out of my wardrobe. I wear it for something completely different, and you probably have things like that too. So even before you go, okay, what do I actually need to make? Yeah, I see it. Were you like, yeah, this is mine. Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. You probably have stuff that you can use that you don't actually have to factor into your budget at all. But it takes a moment for you to actually sit there and go, okay, I'm going to go through my wardrobe and I'm going to find those things. But it's good in the long run. So now I want to go on to some examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you costumes that I've made and indicate how I've stayed within budget, what I've done to keep my budget, and also where I've messed up. And hopefully that will kind of exemplify what I've been talking about for the past 20 minutes. Fingers crossed. If it doesn't, I apologize. But we'll try our best. Also, we'll hope that the pictures actually load. So the first costume I want to talk about is my Wonder Woman costume, which I'm not wearing now because it's freezing. So this Wonder Woman costume, my time breakdown for this was December to April. So it took a couple of months. I started planning it in July, actually, and I didn't actually start building anything until December. So from July to December, I was just collecting materials, finding where I wanted to get. Fantastic.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Thank you. So already I'd had my material budget at 30 and already gone down to 15. So I was pretty happy with that. Then I was looking at shoes because I wasn't going to make the same mistake as with this cosplay. I was going to actually buy a pair of shoes. And I went online and I was thinking, gold heels, how hard can this be to find? Unfortunately, I'm a size 42 feet, so you don't get a lot of women's shoes in that size that are easy to find. So I couldn't find anything for less than 20 quid. And I'm thinking, 30 for the fabric and 20 for the shoes, that's already my budget, and I haven't even started this costume. But I thought, it's July, I'm not making this I'm making this for May MCM. I've got literally a year. And turns out Primark had a sale, always the best thing, got a pair of shoes for 8. So I'm already way under budget for this. And then basically, as I said with the bulk buying, with the paints and adhesives, I factored them in, but I actually didn't have to buy anything to make this costume because I already had all the paint I needed from a previous costume and all the adhesives. And then for foam and LEDs, that was something I had to factor in for this, but I'm still way under budget. Now, when it came to the shield, I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna have to buy more foam. I'm under budget, so that's fine. I can definitely buy the foam. And I was talking to my mum about it again, who is apparently just a genius, and she went, well, what about a party tray? I've got 2 of them at home. And I thought, okay, well, my mum's in the States. She has to bring this party tray from the States in December. If I was making this costume in April for May, I never would have been able to use that method because she wouldn't have been coming over to the country. But I started in July. She told me she was going to bring it down in December. That still gives me another 5 months to make the shield. Fantastic. So I actually didn't have to pay anything for the shield because we already had the stuff for it at home. And it is great that it's a dinner tray because it means if someone bumps into it, I literally don't care. You can't break a dinner tray. And then the wig was actually, it was funny, the wig was the same cost as everything else that I spent on this costume. And I was like, oh my God, I've just spent all this time getting the budget down below 50 and the wig is literally doubling it. And then I remembered Christmas. Awkward family member that doesn't know what to get you. There we go, wig sorted. But for this costume, what happened though is I had to deal with the sword. And at that time I had no supplies in my house to actually make a sword because I just finished uni, didn't have any supplies of my own. And I was thinking, I'm gonna have to buy a sword. And I did, and it sucked because I had to spend 25 quid on getting a foam sword from eBay so I could do my Wonder Woman costume. And that actually then put me £5 over my budget. But the thing is, if I hadn't done the research and I'd been at my budget to begin with, I then would have been looking at an extra 25 for the weapon. Whereas because I was under budget, when I made a mistake and I had to go over, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And so that's why when you work within a budget, it's always good to try and then get it below that budget because accidents will happen, emergencies will happen, something will go wrong, you'll have to remake it, something will go wrong and you'll have forgotten a piece. And so having that leeway is really helpful. And having that leeway early on is really helpful. I'm sure a lot of us have gotten to a con and gone, I'm gonna pull my cosplay out that I'm wearing next week and see how it is. And you've looked at it and gone, oh no, that's bad. And you've had to basically rebuy half the costume in a week and spend way more money on it than you initially intended because of those mistakes. Whereas if you're already under budget, those mistakes aren't too bad. They're not too painful to deal with. Again, oh, okay, so this is fun. My PowerPoint has decided to repeat all the same, it's repeating all the same images. Yeah, that's weird. I love technical difficulties. It's just repeating the same 18. Oh, okay, it goes to that one. Okay, that's fine. It's only actually missed one of my examples, so that's not the end of the world. My next example was basically to show you that you can build armor without actually having to deal with a big budget as well. And this is what I talked about earlier with picking your correct foam, picking your right thermoplastics, and picking your fabrics. Last year I made an armor build that the armor, a light-up sword, a 3-meter long cloak, and the wig ended up costing me about 60 to 70 quid. And that's because I decided I've got 5 months to make this. I'm actually going to hand paint it. An arrow lying around their house, I'm aware, but I'm sure everyone here, because we're all people in costume or at a Comic-Con, you've all got your own weird hobby, which is gonna help in its own way towards your costumes. This is just my example that I can use. And so this costume, because I already had the wig, it's my Wonder Woman wig, and because I'd already done the research for Wonder Woman as to where to get cheap pleather, I already knew I could get all the pleather I needed for under 20 quid. So the research from the previous costume actually basically saved my bacon in regards to making this for as little as possible, because this was literally a spend as little as possible on this costume and make it work. That's what happens when you pick things last minute for me being 2 months before the con, because it takes me forever to make something. So the last thing I want to do before we go into questions is I wanted to do an audience participation thing. Are you guys awake enough for this? You're all laughing nervously. Okay, now you're all laughing nervously more because I pointed it out. We are going to plan a cosplay. So this is the first thing you should be doing before you buy anything. If you have a budget, this is what needs to be the primary thing to do. So I decided to pick something popular. Fire Emblem, anyone? Fire Emblem? Okay, there's a couple of cheers. I was just trying to pick something that was like mildly complicated, but not actually the worst thing in the world. I haven't played Three Houses yet, but I'm very excited for it once I get the console. So I'm looking at this costume and I'm thinking it's probably going to take about 5 months to make this. So, you know, this is maybe me next week going, I'm going to make a cosplay for my MCM. I love Fire Emblem. And looking at this costume, because it's a mix of foam and it's a mix of fabric and it's also got some weapons, I'm thinking maybe 50 to 60 quid. That might be a bit on the low end, but, you know, we'll work with it and see what we can do. So looking at this costume, what can we buy? What do we not actually have to make at all? You can just yell. I mean, you don't have to make the wig. You're 100% right. Yeah, shoes, base for the shoes, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. They've got some sort of like t-shirt and maybe some leggings or trousers underneath. You 100% don't have to make those. So, pardon? You want to buy the coat? Okay. Yeah, I mean, you could, I mean, I know, see, I'm looking at it more as a cloak, but I mean, that's just stylistic at this point. You could buy the coat if you wanted to. I was thinking of this as making it, but, you know, cosplay is whatever you want to do. Live your life. So yeah, you're right. So definitely top, leggings, shoes. The other thing is gloves. There's gloves under this armor. So you can definitely buy those. And just doing a bit of 5-minute research on eBay, this is what I was able to come up with cost-wise. The boots, it depends on what kind of boots you're looking for and also your shoe size. Again, I always have problems finding ladies' shoes in my size, which is just impossible. But, so I'm kind of looking at maybe about 20 quid for all the stuff we can buy. Thought I was breaking another microphone there for a second. So already we're kind of looking at that for our budget. But again, this doesn't mean we have to spend this amount. We now have a price range, then we can go out and find things cheaper. For instance, like Primark and places will have leggings for 150. Okay, it's only 50p, but you get the idea, it's still less. So what about fabric? What fabrics would we think about for staying within a £60 budget for this? Yeah, cottons, we could look at cottons, that's true. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Pardon?
Polyester?
Polyester, absolutely. Maybe looking at man-made fabrics rather than natural fabrics is going to get us closer within our budget, 100%. I definitely agree with the polyester. I was thinking maybe a suiting fabric for the cloak coaty thing. You can get some really nice twill fabrics that are synthetic. You can get 3 meters of it for a pretty decent cost. Again, I'm really biased. I use crushed velvet for everything, but I think cotton would also be a fantastic choice if you're looking for something lightweight. I did say I was thinking of making this costume for May. Maybe velvet is a terrible idea for May. Maybe that is a disaster, and you are right. Thank you for being here. I was about to make a terrible mistake. So again, we're looking at just under 20 quid for this. So we're within 40 quid. We've got 20 extra quid to play with if we were going off of this amount. So the last thing we need to look at is foam. So again, this is going to depend on kind of your size and also what kind of foam you want to use. I look at this and I'm thinking, let's get some 5mm EVA in here. You can get a roll of it for a £5. I'm pretty happy with that. It's already black, so do we have to paint it? Do we want to paint it so it has a metallic effect? Do we just want to varnish it so it's shiny and black? Those are all extra things to consider. But the thing to note is that now we've done the budget, that's 42 quid in total for what we found. We're, what, like almost 20 quid under budget? So if I did want to do a dark metallic surface rather than black, I've now got all of this money to play with in regards to getting nicer paint, because I put the cost down for everything else and I'm still under budget. So it's just things to think about, and I do think that planning is definitely one of the key things that you need to do when you're coming up with these cosplays and trying to work within a certain amount. And it's going to depend on what your budget is. Your budget could be £10, it could be £50, it could be £500. But staying within it, a lot of planning is required, a lot of research is required. And it's also important because you don't want the hobby to take over your life. You do want to be able to do other things with your human self other than just making costumes all the time. And so it's important to kind of have these tips and tricks. Hopefully that was at least somewhat interesting and gave you some ideas. Does anyone actually have any questions? Yes. Oh, we have a microphone runner. Oh, this is exciting. I've never had this before at a panel.
Oh, that's loud.
Hello.
What's the best way to learn about things like fabrics to avoid making expensive mistakes?
Right, so I think the best two ways to is one, internet research. Everything's on Google and it's a great place to start. The other is that a lot of smaller anime conventions, and now MCM, which is fantastic, are doing a lot of these Cosplay 101 panels, general cosplay panels, and so looking for places that do like fabric panels, like the one I went to 2 years ago was extremely helpful. A lot of cosplayers have written things online that you can look up. So basically, for out-of-con research, it's definitely looking up things online, maybe asking people. The cosplay community is fantastic. One of the things about us is everyone has the time to answer questions. Well, like most of us do. And so just if you know someone's used a fabric that you're interested in, ask them about it, ask them where they got it, talk to people. And then when you're at events like these, look out for those kind of panels. And like the one that was on before me were people who'd won competitions, and they said, you know, find us during the con and talk to us, make use of that, find them after and go, I've got a question for you, what do you think of this, what do you think of that? Definitely communication, because it's not something that we learn in school anymore. You don't learn about textiles, which I think is personally really sad. So getting those expertise from people, from the internet, that's going to be the main way to actually find out about it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any at all? Yep, we got one here.
So I contemplated, I had a costume from years ago, like a anthropomorphic Dalek thing.
I love it.
And because it's really old and a bit grimy, what would you use? I felt a little bit sort of almost embarrassed to wear the costume because it was a bit old, a little bit tatty, and even if I did fix it up, I was still a little bit tentative about it, because obviously there are these people in these amazing costumes they spent years and hundreds making. How would you sort of work around that?
I mean, I'm not really sure that this is more of a budget question and more of like a general like cosplay community question, which is that at the end of the day, you should wear whatever you want and not actually think about what other people are going to be in, because at the end of the day, no matter what costume you wear, someone's always going to be wearing it better and someone's always going to be wearing it not as good. And so it's just a case of just kind of doing what you want. But I find that I tend to fix up my cosplays a lot because they get really bashed up at cons. And it's difficult to budget that because it might not be until 2 years later that you need to fix it and things like that. But basically you have to gauge how much you love that costume. If you love it and you're going to wear it a lot, then any cost you spend on it is well done. But if you're fixing up an old cosplay and making a new cosplay at the same time, maybe think about what materials you can use for both. So this year I fixed up the costume I'm wearing now at the same time as making a new one that I'm wearing tomorrow. And for the new one, I realized I needed gold paint because I always seem to run out of gold paint. And I thought that's fantastic because I need to do all the touch-ups on this. So fixing up this costume didn't actually cost me anything because the extra foam I needed to use, the extra gold I needed to use was actually already budgeted for in the other costume. So think about, if you're not sold on wearing it to one event, can you wait until you're getting the supplies for something else, or can you kind of put the supplies in the same pot almost and then get that up? But other than that, you should wear it. There's no reason not to. Anyone else have any questions?
Where did you find a roll of EVA foam for a fiver?
Right, yeah, that's from Polyprops. What I normally do is, because for Polyprops it's a fiver and then you've got shipping, so what I normally do is I think about what I'm building next. So this year I made an armor build, and next year I'm making another armor build. So rather than just buying one roll of foam and going next year I'll buy another one, I bought 2 and also contact cement. So if I added on the shipping for each individual project, it would have only come to £1 extra. But again, it's that bulk buying, thinking ahead of what you're doing. But yeah, Polyprops have it super cheap. Not in this country, but like online for like American stuff, you can get rolls of craft foam for about £5 as well. And it depends again on what millimeter you're getting. I really like 5mm foam because I find, because my arms are like twigs, if I get any more than that, I just kind of look like a Michelin man almost with my armor on. So I can't really go bigger than 5. But you know, if you're looking at 10mm foam, obviously that's going to be pricier. But it's more of a baseline rather than anything else. But yes, foam should not be expensive. It's not a difficult material to make. I don't know why people have expensive foam everywhere unless it's plasticine. There's no reason for it. Another good place for foam is recycle shops. When I lived in Cardiff, there was a recycle shop there, and you could get foam for basically like £1 a meter. And so I was just walking out there with like 10mm rolls of foam going on the bus. It was fantastic. So definitely don't always have to go to cosplay specific places, but yeah, you can get cheap foam.
So I have a question regarding planning.
Can you? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I have a question regarding planning when you're planning so far ahead. Like me, I go up and down in weight quite a lot, and then like, okay, I'm gonna make this costume for something in 6 months, but then it's like, oh, maybe I managed to stick to the diet and lose 70 kilos, and now everything's too loose, or I completely failed and gained 10 kilos, and now I don't fit in it. And like, how to balance how early to start and when to do measurements of what your body actually is when you're supposed to wear it.
That's a really good question. I must admit, it's not something that I'm really fortunate in that I don't change weight. I've been an immortal 12-year-old since I was 12, and it's fantastic. So that's not something that I normally consider. One of the things that's really important to think about for that kind of stuff is how you attach costumes. So we were having a conversation about it earlier, which is that if you use Velcro to attach something and you get smaller or you get bigger, then that Velcro doesn't fit anymore. But you can get attachments like Tacks. I really like using these brass tacks that you can get from WH Smith for attaching things. And that means that if you get smaller or bigger, all you do is poke a new hole. So as long as you've got like a leather awl with you, like when you're traveling to cons, you put the costume on, oh no, it's too small, oh no, it's too big. As long as you've got that leeway and you can put the new hole in, it's fine. It's almost like, when I think of how to adjust for that, it's more about making a costume more like regular clothing rather than a costume. You know, when you have a belt, you've got all that space for all the buttons on the belt, right? So when you are making a costume, if you know that's something that happens quite frequently, add in that space, add in those buttons that you can then use. And it is extra work, and it's a shame that it's extra work, but for the long run, and that's really for fabric. For armor, it's quite difficult to make an armor that you're going to change so drastically that you won't fit into because of how the attachments are. Magnets are also great for this. If you're not sure about your size, magnets are fantastic because they're just going to ping on, and you can move them quite easily. So you're right, it is an extra layer, but you definitely can budget and plan in advance, and also factor in the fact that you will change just by using different materials, which are going to be the same cost, so they're not going to be more expensive. I hope that answers your question. Okay, fantastic. I think there's another one at the back there.
What do you do about tools if you're just starting out?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, what do you budget for tools if you're just starting out?
Question was, how much do you budget for tools when you're just starting?
This is definitely one of the main things, is that your tools are going to be the expensive part when you're just starting out in cosplay. My main suggestion is to look for sales again. So after I had to buy that Wonder Woman sword, I was like, never again. I love making props and I hate having to buy this. and I went to B&Q, and it happened that that weekend they were having a 2-for-1 sale on power tools. So I got a sander and a jigsaw for basically the price of one. So if you know, like, yes, I'm going to be a cosplayer, I'm going to make things, look for those sales, and you can find a lot of things online for cheaper. So for instance, Dremel drills are a really big thing in cosplay. You work with foam, you're going to need a Dremel. But there's ways to buy drills that are basically Dremel drills without having to pay Dremel drill price. I have a rotary tool off eBay for $10. It works just as well as a Dremel, but it's called a rotary tool. But again, if you didn't know that they were called rotary tools and you searched up Dremel, you'd be like, oh my god, I have to spend how much on this? So it's that research again of finding what you want. It is definitely that at the beginning it will be an investment. My suggestion is that you buy what you need for that costume. So if you're making something that doesn't need a sander, there's no point buying a sander until you get to the point where you need one. So focus on the tools that you need at hand. Glue guns are very cheap, that's always going to be something you need. And then build up your armory of cosplay supplies. The other thing is that, as I was saying before with the cosplay community, once you are cosplaying, people will always be happy to help you out and lend things. I was talking to my friend about making a prop that I needed a soldering iron for, and he was like, I have a soldering iron, why didn't you tell me? It just never occurred to me to actually just post on Facebook, hey, does anyone have a soldering iron? And even friends who aren't cosplayers, people are going to have tools that they're happy to lend out. So don't think that you need to buy everything yourself right off the bat. It's always good to have your own thing, so when you wake up at 2 in the morning and go, oh my god, I know how to make this, you can go and be really annoying to everyone at 2 in the morning and start sanding. But you don't have to have that immediately. I hope that answers the question. Brilliant. Uh-oh. Repeat.
Less of a question, more of a comment. If anyone is London-based, there is a company in Wandsworth that do craft supplies and things. So you pay, I think, a £40 or maximum £80 membership for a year, and you can go multiple times a year and just collect craft supplies. Just abundance of craft supplies. So maybe that if anyone's London-based, that might be helpful.
That's a really, really good thing to bring up. I didn't know that, so that's awesome. Anyone else? All right. Okay, last chance.
Oh no, we got one here.
Oh no.
When you were doing your Jack Frost cosplay, I assume the piece of wood didn't already have the crook on it.
No.
How did you affix that?
Right, yeah, so what I did is I cut the staff into multiple pieces, and I got PVA tubing, like the little joints, and then I drilled nails through the PVA and into the wood, and then I plastered over the PVC, I don't know why I keep saying PVA, that's a clue, PVC joints to make it look like tree, and then I wood stained the whole thing so it was the same color. So the thing about that was that I basically had all those joints. Well, I didn't have those joints. My dad had those joints lying around in the basement, and well, he wasn't using them, so mine now. If there are no other questions, feel free to bother me at some other point during the convention. I hope this panel was useful. Thank you for listening to me. Have a good con.
Thank you very, very much, Tabby, for imparting your wisdom. I know I learned a few things, and I'm sure plenty of you have got a few ideas for your next cosplays as well. Next up, we have in about 25 minutes our casual cosplay showcase. This has been open to anyone who wanted to register this morning. We've got young, old, inexperienced, experienced, or who just want the chance to come up on our stage and show off their cosplay.